Hey everybody, it's Sarah here from Heart Breathings, and today we're going to discuss the pros and cons of self-publishing to help you make the decision of whether or not self-publishing is right for you. Okay, so as I was thinking of this video and what I wanted to say, I decided I would come up with the top 5 pros and cons as I see it. And hopefully these will help you make a decision about whether or not self-publishing is right for you, whether it's something you want to take a risk to do, or if you would rather seek traditional publishing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over each pro and then give you the accompanying con. So number 1, full creative control. For me, this is like the mega ultimate pro. This is exactly why I decided to self-publish in 2010, because my husband was reading a blog for a woman who was writing middle grade fiction, and when he started reading her blog, she was not published yet, and then through the years of reading it, she became published. Then she wrote a post while she was going through edits where she was like, be prepared to cut out the parts of the story you love, to completely rearrange your book and make it whatever they decide is going to sell better. And that, like, ooh, it just hurt my heart, because I thought, yes, there are people who may know slightly better how to make my story stronger, but to completely pull my story apart and tell me I have to rewrite it and make it sexier or put a different love interest in it or change this from like a fundamental part of my story into something I have no interest in writing, and they are allowed to do that, was just like, okay, I do not want to sign up for that. And then on top of that, I had a friend in my local RWA group, which is the Romance Writers of America, who had a similar experience. She sold a trilogy to a really, one of the big 6 publishers back in the day, and she was excited about it. Then she starts getting into, she turns the book in, and they're looking for edits and things, and they want her to basically rewrite the entire story. And she was in love with that story, and they basically were like, hey, here's a title, doesn't really mean anything, but we think it's super marketable, so like, can you just change the whole book to match this very trendy title? So I understand why traditional publishers do that, and I understand that they're just in a business of making money, and they know how to package books, and a lot of times they do it a hell of a lot better than some of us indies do, and they have a lot of experience. But on the flip side, for me, I became a writer so that I could write the stories I most wanted to write, and I just didn't want to give up that creative control. I like being able to make choices about my book cover art. I like being able to make all the choices about what I call myself, how my name looks on my book covers, how my description reads, how my keywords go. I want to make all those decisions. I want to decide what my characters do and say without having an editor that can tell me something different. Because right now, as it stands, if my editor says to me, hey, change this, and I don't want to, I don't change it. So I have that full creative control. And maybe some people don't need that or don't want that because they really feel like they will be a better writer if they're going with these professional editors. But the truth is, you can hire the same editors that work for some of these big houses to work for you. But in the end, you're the one who gets the final say. And for me, that's a major, major pro. Now, on the flip side of that, the con is when you have full creative control, you have to have really, really good instincts. So this can be a huge con for you if you don't have great instincts about story, because if you're just this much off on telling a really great story because you just don't have that instinct, or you're so close to the story and you've been working on it so long that you just can't see what it would take to make it better, maybe you're going to miss out on something that could have been really great, and you're going to miss that mark because you didn't have publisher or professional editor to guide you through that process. Also, as we all know, authors are notorious, well, all creators really are notorious for having like extreme self-doubt. So when you don't have that person like guiding and leading you through the process, you could really get lost in self-doubt, like, I don't know if this is the right cover, and there's not going to be anybody to tell you. You can make friends along the way, you can find other authors that can help you make those decisions, but in the end, it all falls on your shoulders. So having full creative control can also be a lot of pressure when it comes to making all of those decisions, especially if you don't have great instincts or you really tend to doubt yourself. So having a publisher there that's going to hold your hand through the process can be a pro for some people. So it just depends on your personality and what you're looking for. You also have to know kind of what you're giving up in exchange. Like if you want that publisher holding your hand, you're going to have to give up some of your royalty. You're going to have to give up some of these other pros that I'll talk about in just a minute. Number 2 pro to self-publishing is there's less barrier to entry. You don't have to have the most polished manuscript. You don't have to have spent 5 years working on it and have like the #1 best story ever. Now, of course you want to, but you don't have to. You don't have to wait for someone else to go, yes, this story is good enough. You can just follow your own instincts and get it to the best of your ability where you are right now, and you can go ahead and put that book out. And that's a huge pro. Also, market saturation is not going to keep you from publishing your book. Like let's say when Twilight was really big, they probably wanted lots of other Twilight-y kind of books. But once every publisher had their own version of Twilight, they probably stopped buying a lot of vampire type novels. When that trend changed, they were like, ooh, let's go to buy stuff that's more like the Hunger Games. And there was this huge dystopian trend. Then, things switched and they switched and switched, and trends are changing all the time. Well, what if you really, really wanted to write a vampire novel and it's like the book you're so proud of, but traditional publishers and agents say, well, that's not what we're buying right now. Try writing this other thing. It goes back to full creative control, but it's also less barrier to entry because you don't have to write what's selling right now. You can literally write anything you want to write, and you don't have to answer to anybody but the reader. And in my experience, I have found that genres that traditional publishing thinks are dead, or they're saying we're not going to publish that, tend to do extremely well in indie, because I don't think publishers always know what's going to sell. But it's not just that. It's not as simple as that. It's also that they have a completely different set of goals. They can't get things out as quickly. They have to be looking ahead much farther. They just have a completely different style of overhead and business, and they have things to think about that we as indies don't have to think about. They're making decisions from a completely different place, and that's okay, but it's just something different. Whereas, if urban fantasy is selling really well in indie, you can write it and you can do what you want with it. You can write it however you want and get it out immediately. Whereas in traditional publishing, they may not be buying your werewolf urban fantasy right now, and you would just have to write something else. Now, on the flip side of that, when we're talking about cons, now this might be a con to some of you and it might not be a con to some of you, but when you're giving up that traditional publisher, you're also giving up the validation and the social status of being able to say, I have X person as my agent and I sold this book for a three books for a 6-figure deal, and I've got this publisher. It kind of, there's definitely not the same stigma on self-publishing that it used to be back when I started in 2010, but it's still out there, and you're kidding yourself if you think it doesn't exist. Now, everybody knows now that it is a viable career, and everybody knows that there are some really great indie authors out there, but there are equally as many terrible indie authors, and there's people that scam the system and people who do things wrong. So it's just, there's still that little bit of stigma on indies, and I see it all the time. It doesn't matter if I've sold 500,000 books. I walk into a group of authors and people go, oh, who publishes you? And I say, oh, I'm self-published. And you get that kind of like, oh gosh, I don't want to sit by you. And it still happens, and it's ridiculous to me, but you have to be aware of it before going into it. And I do think that over time we're going to see less and less of that, because we're going to just have more super talented people and more trad pub authors jumping ship and coming over to the indie side because they see all these pros and they're ready to take their career into their own hands. But just know that level of validation and having somebody choose you from the crowd, that you're giving that stuff up. Even the validation of walking into a Barnes & Noble and seeing your book on the shelf, some indies will never see that. There are some that have negotiated trad pub deals or hardcover or paperback deals, and they see their books in Target, but it's very rare to get a print deal like that. So most of us, we're not going to see our books in the bookstore. Our grandmothers are not going to be able to go and buy our books in a regular bookstore, and it takes away that little bit of validation. When I started self-publishing, there was also they wouldn't let indie authors onto like USA Today and New York Times. So I was willing to give that up for all these other pros, but some people are not. Some people really just want to have that validation of that book in their hands that has a traditional publisher on the spine and be able to walk into a Barnes & Noble and pull their book off the shelf. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the important thing is to know that that's something that you want or that you're willing to give up. You know, there's maybe a little stab of jealousy sometimes when I see a friend who's traditionally published that it's like launch day and they got roses from their publisher. But, you know, my husband jokingly was like, I'll send you roses if that's what you really want, because I'm not willing to give up some of the other things I would have to give up. So it's give and take. There are some things I think must be great about traditional publishing, but there's also things that are great about indie publishing. So you have to really think them through and decide what you're willing to compromise on and what you're not. So number 3, working on your own schedule is a huge pro for self-publishing. You can get things to market so incredibly fast. You can work on your own schedule. If you want to take advantage of a trend that's going right now, like, ooh, the 50 Shades Freed movie just came out, I really want to write something like that. I'm going to start a new pen name and I'm going to go after that. You could have a book out in 2 weeks if you worked your butt off and got it done. So you can write as fast as you want. There's a lot of people who, I mean, I think part of what Stephen King did, correct me if I'm wrong, but he started the Richard Bachman pen name partially because they told him back in the day that he was going to saturate his own market. So they were like, we can't publish more than 1 book a year from you or whatever it was. So he was like, well, let me start this pen name and see if I can do it again and have a different name. Nora Roberts, I know, was another one. She's just so prolific. She's writing so fast. If she was not as popular as she was, do you think these publishers would let her write as quickly as she is writing? Probably not. But now you've got a lot of indies that are just as prolific as Nora Roberts, and there's no time constraint in terms of you can write as fast as you want, you can write as slowly as you want. If you want to write just 1 book every 2 years, you can do that. Now with TradPub, they might be telling you, no, okay, we want book 2 in this series. We bought the trilogy from you. We need this in 6 months. And you're going to have to deliver because you're going to have a contract that tells you that. With indie publishing, you don't have a contract like that. You just do it when you want to do it. So if you've got like 5 babies at home and you just want to take your time with it, you may have to say, okay, I might not make as much money right away. I might grow more slowly, but you can do it. That's the key. You can do whatever you want. You can set that on time schedule, and that's a huge positive. On the con side of that, you're going to be running your own business. Now, rather than just having the time to write, now you've got to carve out time to market your books, to make all the business decisions like cover art. You have to basically be a creative director for your business. You have to come up with the blurb for your story. Nobody else is going to write that for you. All of these decisions that go into publishing a book, you're the only one that's now going to be responsible for that. So instead of just having like your 1 hour or 2 or 3 hours a day to write, you've got to take some piece of that time, and you've got to now market your books and come up with this, you know, CEO side of being a writer. And that can be a huge con for some people, especially if you don't have a lot of time. There's a huge learning curve that goes with this, and the truth is, even over time, it's not like that gets a lot easier. Sure, you come to know the nuts and bolts in terms of, oh, I know how to upload now, I've got my systems in place, but things are always changing in publishing, especially since self-publishing came about. Like, trends change, vendors change, algorithms change, Amazon introduces programs, royalties change, things change all the time, and you've got to stay in the know, you've got to know what you're doing, and you have to run this full-time business. So you can have as much or as little time to publish as you want, but you also need to keep in mind that you're going to have to do a lot more as an indie than you will as a traditional published author. Now, with that being said, I will say, even though I don't have personal experience traditional publishing, what I'm hearing from a lot of my authors, friends who are traditionally published, is that as time goes on, they're expected to do more and more of these kind of things that indies are doing. They're maybe not asked to write their own blurb, but I did have a friend that said she was asked to write and submit her own blurb and description for her book. So publishers aren't even doing that. Maybe they choose your cover art, but the problem there can go back to the creative control thing we were talking about. They may choose cover art that sucks, and there's nothing you can do about it. But they can take some of the things off your plate, but that doesn't mean you don't still need to have a Facebook group and run Facebook ads and have a Twitter account and all of that stuff. They're still expecting you to do that. And so I think this, in terms of a con, is becoming less and less relevant because you're having to do it whether you're traditionally published or not. All right, so moving on to number 4 is you can make more money per sale as an indie. Now, I won't go like super in depth into the royalty structure, but when it comes to books that are $2.99 and up, at most vendors, you're making anywhere from 52 to 70% royalty. So that means, like, on average for a $3.99 book, I'm making about $2.75 a sale, somewhere around there. Well, that's a lot of money that's going back in my pocket. 70% of that, I'm getting that money. When you're traditionally published, I think, I don't, honestly, I haven't even looked in so long, I don't even know the numbers, but I think it's like paperbacks and stuff, they're still making less than 10% per copy. So you're looking at less than $1 for most of these authors they're making per sold book, but you're asking the reader to spend a lot more money. Then when it comes to the ebooks, I think like somewhere around 17%. Feel free to comment and let me know if I'm off on that, because I'm sure things have changed since the last time I really looked into it. But it's ridiculously amount lower, but people, the traditional publishers are charging more. So you have to sell less books as an indie to make more money. Now, you don't have, on the flip side of that with the con, is you don't have a publisher helping to market your books. Now, not every author who gets traditionally published gets the same treatment when it comes to marketing, but if you're lucky enough to get a publisher that believes in your book and that really wants to push you and market you, you could get a lot of visibility for that you're not going to get on your own as an indie. You might never have access to that. Like, you're never going to get access to the end cap at a Barnes & Noble or like front page at Amazon the same way that you would if you had a traditional publisher that was really pushing your book. But again, it's all about checks and balances, give and take here. You make more money per sale as an indie, but you might get less visibility in some instances. With traditional publishing, you get usually an advance instead of having to pay money up front. So as an indie, you have to pay for your cover art, your editing, all of those things. Now, actually publishing to the vendors like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iBooks, that's free. But you do have to pay for your cover art and the book packaging, basically your editing and everything that goes into it. And these days that can be upwards of $1,000. And usually is. So you have to put in that initial investment. Then you have to actually promote and market your books, which also takes an investment. So that can be a pro and a con. You may make more money per sale, but you got to have money up front. Whereas with traditional publishing, you usually get an advance, but it takes a long time for your book to come out. So you may see a piece of that advance because your agent usually gets some, and then Uncle Sam takes a bunch of it. You may see a piece of that advance right up front, but then you may not see any more money from that for a year or longer. All right, so number 5, flexibility. When you are an indie author, you can be extremely flexible and you can change things very quickly. A reader emails you and says, there's a typo on page 12 where he says this and she does this, and you can be like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go fix that. Whereas if you're traditionally published and they find typos, I don't even know how they handle that. I can't imagine they're like re-uploading stuff very quickly, but it would take a process because you've got to go to your editor, you've got to tell them what the change is and ask for those changes. And I've seen, even with like keywords and categories, that authors have been like, hey, why am I in this category on iBooks? And it's taken months for their publisher to push those changes through. Well, when you're an indie, you can just go in and make that change, and a couple hours later it's live. So you've got that flexibility to make changes on the fly. Same thing that I was talking about, like you could take advantage of trends. Like Ready Player One is coming out later this year, I believe, I hope. Amazing book if you have not read that. But there's a movie coming out, and this is super, super popular genre right now with this lit RPG, and it's a growing genre. So if you just had a great lit RPG idea, you could take advantage of that and write it and get it out and get it to market before the movie comes out. Whereas if you're writing it for traditional publishing, it may be 2020 before that book comes out, and you're going to miss that trend. So you've got that flexibility to act quickly. You can also change things very quickly. You can say, well, let me change this cover art today and see if that gets me more sales. I've heard Kate Perry and Bella Andre both speaking about this at different conferences, that when they made changes to their cover art, they saw sales going up immediately. So when you're an indie, you have the flexibility to make those changes and look at the data. You have pure access to how many sales you're making, whereas as a traditionally published author, you may not see your sales in real time. You may not even find out your sales for like 6 months. I don't know that I could handle that, but it's apparently something a lot of authors have to deal with. But you see that real-time sales so you can be like, wow, I saw those sales spike up right when I changed that description or I changed those keywords. And then you can start to manage your business that way a little bit better because you've got those tweaks that you can make. You can change your prices. You can run a 99-cent sale. You can't really do that when you're traditionally published because you have to go through the publisher, get permission to do it. They're probably not going to run 99-cent sales very often, but that's a huge marketing tool, and you have the flexibility to use those tools when you're an indie author. On the flip side, on the con side of indie publishing, you're fully responsible. You may be flexible, but you're also fully responsible for every decision that you make. You could change something that suddenly makes your sales tank and you never can get it back. You could make a decision to try Kindle Unlimited and go exclusive to Amazon, and you could lose, 90 days. I think it's 90 days. You could lose 90 days of great sales because you committed to this program and you made a mistake. And you know what? There's nobody to blame but yourself. Now, there are people that try to blame Amazon and try to blame iBooks and try to blame the readers, which is the most ridiculous, but there are people who try to blame everybody but themselves. But the end truth is when you're an indie author, there's really nobody to blame but yourself when you make those types of decisions. So you can blame Amazon all you want for starting Kindle Unlimited, but in the end, that's the kind of business that we run. Is we run a business that is very, is constantly shifting. So when you enter that business and you realize that's how it is, you have to keep your eyes open to the changes and you have to try to make the best decisions you can. But in the end, you are fully responsible for the changes and the decisions that you make. Whereas when you traditionally publish, not that you have someone to blame, but you have someone else who's like accountable for those choices, someone else that has the pressure of making those decisions. And that can sometimes feel safer to a lot of people. So those are my top 5 pros and cons for self-publishing. And I hope that it has helped you at least start to think about whether self-publishing is really right for you. In my opinion, it's better for most people as long as your goals align with what you can accomplish as an indie author. I think that it is much more rewarding to have full creative control. I think that there are probably more authors making 6 figures than ever before. And there's so many people who have found great success as indies, whereas there are a lot of publishers that are, cutting back. When I started with RWA back in 2007 or 2008, there were so few people in that group who were actually making a full-time living. So many of the authors who were published traditionally were still struggling with a full-time job, and they were making maybe $10,000 to $15,000 a year, and that was considered like, wow, you're doing amazing. And I'm not saying that they weren't doing amazing, but now that we have the ability to take our career into our own hands, there are more authors out there now making full-time income, $40,000 or more, working from home, writing full-time, taking care of their kids, doing everything they need to do, providing for their families. There are dozens, if not hundreds of authors out there making 6 figures, and you've never even heard of them. It is just completely mind-blowing how much opportunity there is, not just to make money, but to get your stories out there in front of readers. So I think for most people, indie publishing, if you can't tell, I'm extremely passionate about it. Indie publishing is an amazing choice, but I know that there are some people out there, some of you who are just not meant for indie publishing. Maybe you write too slow to really get traction in a very fast indie world. Maybe you just can't handle the pressure of having to make all of these decisions for yourself, and you don't want to take the time to put the systems in place to have others help you make those decisions. And it's okay if you don't want to indie publish, but what I would love for you to do is take the time to really think about these pros and cons and weigh them against each other to decide what's right for you, because this isn't about what's right for everyone else. This is about you and your life. And I want nothing more than to help you make money writing books you love. And if that's a traditional publishing path, a hybrid path where you're doing a little bit of trad pub and a little bit of indie, or if you're going all indie, it doesn't matter to me. I've got no judgment on that. All I want is for you to build a business that you love. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this post on top 5 pros and cons for self-publishing. I hope that it's helped you think of some things you might not have thought of before so that you can decide whether or not self-publishing is right for you. If you did enjoy this post, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe down below. And if you want, please leave a comment and let me know whether you think self-publishing is right for you. Are you already self-publishing? Are you enjoying it? Are you traditional publishing and thinking about moving over to the indie space? I would love to get to know you better, and I would love to help you make money writing books that you love. Thank you so much for your support, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!